Warning, this episode may contain disturbing content, soothing narration, and mild existential dread. Basically, murder ASMR for stressed professionals. Listener discretion is advised. Hell, it might be necessary.
It's a tale as old as time. Boy meets girl, they fall in love, and eventually, the boy testifies against the girl in one of the most unhinged serial arson cases to ever hit rural Virginia. It started the way a lot of relationships do. A bar, a pretty girl, a guy who notices, a conversation, and before long, wedding plans, 2 new business ventures, and a future right there in the small town where they both grew up. But somewhere along the way, this love story went off the rails. Because while Charlie Smith and Tanya Bundick were building a life together, they were also destroying a county with fire. It started in Accomack County, Virginia in November of 2012. And in less than 5 months, 87 fires ripped through this rural community, baffling investigators and stretching already thin volunteer fire departments to their limits. This wasn't your typical arson case. The motives didn't fit the usual patterns for arson. There was no money, no revenge, no attempt to cover another crime. And the reason why is one I still struggle to fully wrap my head around. And I'll give you a heads up now. This might not be one for the younger listeners, unless you're ready to have some uncomfortable conversations about what happens on the biological side of adult relationships. And the people responsible, they didn't fit the profile. They're not young, not isolated, not outsiders. They were a couple, established, known, the kind of people with real ties to their community. This is a case that breaks the mold in just about every way possible. This is Lit by Love, the Accomack County, Virginia arsons, right here on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and here to remind you that burning love is supposed to be figurative and not literal.
And I'm just a tiny dot on the horizon.
If you'd like to express your figurative burning love for us, go leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. Those stars are like little blue pills for the algorithm. They help big platforms like Apple and Spotify notice us and push us out to a wider audience because we're a grower, not a shower.
Gross.
Go stroke the algorithm for us.
Don't touch the algorithm. You don't know where it's been.
You can even leave a comment or written review to really ring our bell. After all, this week we have finally hit that culturally significant milestone on Apple Podcasts. 69 ratings. And we're at 71 on Spotify, and we're very mature about it.
Clearly.
Special shout out to Rappy Lafiti, Becky Beasley, and Lunchbox314 for the Podbean comments, and Louie over on Spotify for letting us know he too is committed to cheese. Respect.
Respect.
And if you're looking to spice things up a little, might we recommend browsing our spread shop? Because we're pretty sure you'd look really hot decked out in our logo. The link's in the show notes. Crime to Burn will always be free on your favorite podcast platform, supported by ads, but if you want to help offset the cost of court records, which are insanely expensive, you can get your episodes ad-free over on Patreon. We're also just a couple of weeks away from our new sticker drop, so it is a great time to join. Be sure you're following us on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X. A little attention over there goes a long way with likes, comments, and shares, and as always, we love hearing from you. Send us your case suggestions, episode feedback, personal fire stories, and your cringiest pickup lines at crimetoburn@gmail.com. Now let's talk sources. This week I read American Fire, Love, Arson, and Life in a Vanishing Land by Monica Hesse, and it is an absolutely incredible book about this case. Monica really manages to thread the needle here. It has the pacing and momentum of a novel, but it's grounded in real reporting and real events.
Did she used to work for the Washington Post?
She did. How'd you know?
Pretty smart.
It's a genuinely entertaining read, even when the subject matter drifts into what are we doing here territory and drifts into someone's pants at one point. You've now been warned twice. But in all seriousness, it's a beautifully written book, and I recommend it without reservation. You can find it linked in the show notes. But for now, we're starting back on November 12th of 2012, when a friend of Deborah Clark's was driving by her house sometime a little after 10 p.m. and pulled into her driveway and began banging on her door. This was unusual, especially because he was yelling, "Hey, the house across the field is on fire." That's concerning under any circumstances, but especially for Clark, who knew that just a few months earlier, that field had been a cornfield. And what now remained was dried grass and the remnants of harvested corn. Excellent tinder. Also, Clark's niece lived right next door, so Clark ran over there first to warn her before calling 911. Dispatch received the call at 10:41 p.m. An abandoned two-story house on Dennis Drive in Accomack County, Virginia, was on fire, and it was spreading rapidly into the field. Now, Accomack County isn't suburban, it's rural. The Tyson chicken plant is the main employer. And the county isn't so much divided by race as it is by whether you're a born here or a been here. And for listeners who grew up somewhere more urban, places like this don't usually have 24-hour staffed fire stations. Firefighters volunteer, unpaid, keeping a pager that can go off in the middle of the night, pulling them out of bed to drive to the station and get the apparatus on the road. This is exactly the kind of area that I grew up in. And my first fire station was also home response. In fact, Accomack County is geographically close to where I grew up. It sits on the Delmarva Peninsula, separated from mainland Virginia by the Chesapeake Bay. It includes Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge and Assateague Island, areas famous for their herd of feral ponies. And yes, according to local legend, those ponies descended from Spanish horses shipwrecked off the Virginia coast sometime in the 16th century.
But they're not just horses, they're small.
I know. Now, some people dispute the shipwreck theory, but the fire department owns one of the herds of ponies, and they say it was a shipwreck, so we're going with that. Now, every year these mini ponies, are herded from Assateague and swum across the channel to Chincoteague.
It didn't look that organized to me, I guess.
Well, see, I suspect that the ponies, they just swim when they want to swim, but there's an organized pony swim every year. So every year these ponies are herded from Assateague and swum across the channel to Chincoteague. And the pony swim is a huge tourist draw. And yes, the Virginia herd is owned and managed by the Chincoteague Volunteer Fire Department. Now, in 2024, the population of Accomack County was about 33,000, a number that's only increased by a couple hundred people since 2012 when this arson spree took place. The county has 13 independent volunteer fire companies. And in rural areas like this, especially with home response departments, there are some challenges. For starters, response time. Firefighters don't live at the station. They're at home, or at work, or asleep until a pager goes off in the middle of the night and they have to get up, get dressed, drive to the station, and then get the apparatus on the road. Occasionally, you might sleep at the station, maybe during like a really bad winter storm or something, but there's no bunk room. When we did it at my first station, we were fighting over couches in a tiny TV room or stuck on a cot out in the engine bay, waking up smelling like diesel. If you managed to get comfortable enough to sleep at all, that is. And then there's the daytime problem. During business hours, most volunteers are at paying jobs that don't let you leave to go fight a fire in the middle of the day. So there are times when there just aren't enough people to respond, which is why in a lot of rural areas, you can join the fire department as a teenager and leave school when a call comes in. And that is exactly how my own fire service career started. A very strategic plan to skip school without getting in trouble. And here I am, more than 30 years later, a fire protection engineer and an arson and fire podcaster. So maybe sometimes skipping school isn't all bad. And in places like this, the fire department is so much more than a public service. This is the community. Joining the fire department becomes more than just an unpaid job. It is a place where people go to hang out, where they go to unwind, where they become something that's part of something much bigger than themselves. These volunteer departments thrive on community support, and in return, they take care of their own. it's as much social as it is service, and above all, it becomes a very large surrogate family. And one of those companies, the Tasley Volunteer Fire Company, has now been serving Accomack County for 100 years this year. And to give you an idea of the call volume these departments handle, in 2022, Tasley responded to 139 calls in their own district and assisted on another 178 calls outside of it. But most of those calls were not fires. Across the entire eastern shore of Virginia in 2022, there were 135 structure fires total. So if we divide that across the departments operating at the time, you're looking at roughly 9 to 10 structure fires per department per year. That's it. And that's an important number to keep in mind as we start to understand the scope of what is about to happen. Now, in terms of full transparency, that number is based on fires within each department's own district where they're first due. But departments do respond to neighboring jurisdictions when there's a working fire, so they'll see more than just their own calls every year. But even taking that into account, within any given district, you're still looking at fewer than 10 structure fires a year. So on that November night, the first due engine responds with 2 firefighters. 2. Plus the chief arriving in his own vehicle.
That is not unusual.
It's not.
My only firefighting experience was very rural, right? And that's exactly what we would do. What else would you do?
When I was in the fire department and we had a call at my house, it was an emergency medical call and not a fire call. The ambulance came with a driver and people were on their way home from work at the time. And so my car was just full of fire department people's cars as they drove by until they had enough people to take the ambulance to the hospital. Like, that's just how it works in rural communities.
Yeah, when you're doing rural response, first responder means something different. I think a lot of people take first responder and use that as a general term or generic term for someone who shows up first or whatever, right? But that's, to be a first responder out there, you actually go through a whole lot of classes and a whole lot of certification process, and you're the elite of that group if you have that title. That's different out there.
It really is. And what I think is funny is, you know, when I tell people the story of the medical emergency at my house, maybe I'll tell it on the podcast one day, but when it went out over the radio, it went out not as our address first, but as the Musser house first, because everyone knew where the Musser house was, and people just started pulling in, and then they gave the address after that. And when I called 911, the person who picked up the phone was like, April? They knew it was me. Like, that's how it is in a small town. Everybody knows everybody. And reading Monica Hesse's book on this, she even talks about dispatch calling the chief directly, and like their conversations were like 3 words. Like, they knew what was going on and everything. And it really brought me back to my early firefighting days and being in that kind of a rural community and that kind of neighborhood, and imagining what these firefighters went through, knowing this person was someone in their community and not knowing who it was. So the first due engine responds with 2 firefighters, just 2, plus the chief who arrived in his own vehicle. And the one thing that he recognizes right away is that water supply is going to be a problem, because water supply is always a problem, because there are no fire hydrants. In rural areas like this, most departments have to rely on tankers. And when one runs out of water, another one takes its place while the first one goes to refill. And refill doesn't mean hooking up to some giant water tower usually. It usually means drafting from a pond or any available water source, possibly even someone's backyard pool if it's close enough. 4 stations were rung out on the initial call, and that is typical for this area. And they finish around 1 a.m. That's when they finally terminate command. But the house is a total loss. But they did manage to keep the fire from spreading to nearby homes, and because it was an abandoned house, there was no reason to do interior attack. They would have just been putting firefighters at risk for no reason. And then there's one detail that doesn't quite sit right. This house had been abandoned for years and years. There was no lightning storm that night. The house had no electricity. So that rules out most of your usual accidental causes of fire. But things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. Back at their station, All the crews are deep in the post 1 a.m. fire cleanup after hours on a working fire, running on fumes, trading sleep for overhaul and hose repacking. They're finally getting ready to turn in when another call comes in, just 3 hours after the first, another structure fire. This time in some old abandoned buildings that in earlier times housed migrant workers in the area. Buildings that now sat empty, or they did until they burned down. And just 8 minutes after that second call, dispatch received a third call for another fire. 3 separate structure fires in one night, in a place that averages about 9 structure fires in an entire year. That is not something you ignore. Something in Accomack County was very, very wrong. And that's where it started. An abandoned house, noticed by a passing motorist. But by the time this case was over, fire departments across Accomack County would respond to 87 structure fires in less than 5 months. And Accomack County didn't have a fire investigator. 3 fires in one night was enough for officials in the county to call the Virginia State Police, because 23 hours after the first fire, there was a 4th fire, and an hour after that, a 5th, and then a 6th. 6 structure fires in less than 30 hours. 1 fire is one thing, 2, unusual. 6 in 30 hours, that is not coincidence. That is arson. And what made it even stranger was these were all abandoned houses, which rules out a lot of the usual motives in arson.
He was a real estate agent.
Somebody's trying to get their property value up. Which rules out a lot of the usual motives in arson. There was no financial gain. There was no revenge. There was no attempt to cover up another crime. There were no remains found in the building or other evidence of trying to hide other criminal activity with the fires. And no witnesses reported seeing anything out of place. They didn't report any prowlers. They didn't see any unfamiliar vehicles. And when investigators started looking at the scenes, there was practically nothing to work with. Because when a fire investigator arrives, they're reading the fire. Where is the damage the worst?
I hope it's not Braille.
Where is the damage the worst? Where is it the least? Where is the smoke staining, the burn patterns, the structural failures, wind direction, fire spread? All of it can tell a story. But in Accomack County, what they found were just piles of ash. And with so little to go on, investigators were already facing a difficult realization. The hardest arsonists to catch are the ones without a clear motive. They're not targeting a person. They're not settling a grievance. They're not chasing money. They're doing it for something else. Something internal. Something psychological. Some of them might be acting under the influence of drugs or mind-altering substances, or dealing with hallucinations or schizophrenic delusions. Mental health issues can absolutely lead one to fire setting. And then there are those who set fires in the absence of these issues. Psychology has a word for that: pyromania. And at its core, pyromania is defined by a few key traits: repeated, deliberate fire setting, a buildup of tension before the act, a fascination with fire, the tools, the process, the aftermath, and then relief, gratification, and even in some cases, pleasure after the fire is set or while watching it burn.
That's the weirdest wank session.
But crucially, pyromania is not about money or revenge or covering up other crimes. And it's not pyromania if it can be better explained by another mental health condition. In other words, this fire setting is driven purely by internal psychological need. Now, statistically, people who fit this profile tend to be male, about 2/3 of them. And many are younger, with the average age of onset around 18 years. And a significant number have other impulse control issues or co-occurring conditions. But here's the important part. Pyromania is exceptionally rare. And when sample sizes are small, those statistics that we look at start to get real messy. And despite what pop culture might suggest, fire setting for sexual arousal is extremely uncommon. Studies put it somewhere between 1% and 3% of cases, and when you consider that only about 16% of arson cases ever even lead to an arrest, and only a tiny fraction of those go to conviction, what you're left with is a type of crime that's just incredibly difficult to solve. And investigators knew early on that this wasn't a case that was going to be solved in a lab. The evidence wasn't going to be on their side, at least not the fire science evidence. And building a criminal profile, that wasn't likely to point them to an obvious suspect either. So the question became, would the arsonist make a mistake? Would they do something, anything, that could point investigators in the right direction? Because one thing was certain. Investigators were staring down a worst-case scenario, a motive so psychologically complex that it could help the offender evade detection until they slipped up, because someone who set 6 fires in 30 hours isn't finished. And Accomack County had no shortage of abandoned buildings left to burn. So the question was, could investigators find them before they escalated and someone got hurt?
I have a question. What is wrong with Accomack County where they got so many abandoned buildings?
So Accomack County was originally mostly a farming area. Farming and oyster, is that fishing? Is that oyster fishing? Oyster.
I think they call it farming.
Oyster farming?
I think they do.
So it was farming, chicken houses, and oyster farming. So then Tyson came in, bought up a bunch of the old farmland, and commercialized a lot of the farming, which is why
Tyson was doing oysters?
Tyson was doing the chickens. Chickens and oysters. Accomack County. Chickens, oysters. Chickens and
Who's
oysters.
doing the oysters?
The fishermen. The fisher farmers. Not Tyson. But Tyson was the number one employer. So they came in and started commercializing a lot of the little farms to being chicken raisers for them and opened a plant down in Accomack County. So they had been an area that also, obviously, for chicken farming,
So it was the smell that drove everyone out and they didn't want to live there? I don't think it was the smell.
So then what happened is a lot of these family farms that were now getting paid by Tyson to raise chickens for them stopped growing crops because it stopped being as profitable. And so the migrant workers that were coming in every season to do the harvest stopped being necessary. And we know there was a lot of migrant camps in the area. So those all became abandoned. And because the area, the population really hasn't changed since 2012. It's like, I think it was like 250 or 350 people more now than it was in 2012. So people are moving away to go to bigger cities with better job opportunities. So these houses that are sitting there that have been in families for generations and generations and generations, and great grandma finally dies and people have lives now in a big city, they're not coming back. So the area is just slowly decaying away. A lot of these rural areas want to preserve their ruralness, and their younger generations want to go and sow their wild oats somewhere else, and they end up building a life somewhere else and don't want to come back. So the question was, could investigators find them before they escalated and someone got hurt? Come back next week as we take you deeper into 5 months of fiery terror on Lit by Love, the Accomack County, Virginia arsons, right here on Crime to Burn.
This sounds weird. I won't live in a tin can with you.
So far, we've traumatized the cat for the first time. The cat that has no fear now has fear.
Nothing gets through its whole life with no fear.
Maybe you could reformat my desk later. You breathe so loud. I think you run out of farts before you run out of...
No, I don't think I came with any.
That's why you'll run out first.
Listeners should be relieved to know that listening to this podcast will not cause any of the following side effects. Spontaneous development of a damp, mysterious second belly button. Teeth briefly tasting like pennies and regret. Sudden molting of perfectly good eyebrows. A faint but undeniable smell of wet campfire following you into professional settings. Knees making microwave popcorn sounds when climbing stairs. Unexplained soot fingerprints appearing on objects you definitely did not touch. Mild possession by a very polite Victorian chimney sweep. The sensation that your left sock knows what you did. Persistent eye contact with raccoons that feel a little too intentional. Temporary replacement of your internal monologue with the fire safety lecture. The appearance of an extra, judgmental elbow. A small but passionate colony of imaginary moths forming a union in your closet. Rare but concerning cases of dramatic cape behavior in non-cape owners. An itch that seems emotionally personal. An extremely rare swelling in areas normally reserved for dignity and silence. If you experience increased curiosity, inappropriate laughter during serious discussions of fire science, or the urge to check your smoke detectors just in case, that is considered normal. Crime to burn will not cause swelling or infection between the anus and genitals.
I think that you got a sentient fog machine. Is your basement haunted? No, that's just my husband's fog machine. It's got an attitude.
Probably the worst hula girl ever.
I don't think Ryan Gosling looks surprised about everything.
I do.
Jonah Hill, I kind of want to punch in the face.
Oh, see, I would bring Jonah Hill along with me to punch these other guys in the face. Why do you want to punch Jonah Hill in the face?
His face just looks punchable.
No, you're thinking of has been punched. What do you have? What did he do to you?
Nothing. He looks punchable.
We're going to have to go get some counseling.
It's really more, for me, it's more about facial geometry.
Really?
Yeah. Like, there's certain faces that I think would look really fascinating being punched in, like, slow motion with, like, their lips, like, sliding over. And
Oh.
That's what it...
This is really visceral for you.
Jonah Hill's face, I think, would look fabulous being punched in slow motion.
Man, you guys are savages.
Like,
I think their eyes are too close together, and I just kind of want to help spread them out.
I'm fine with Ryan Gosling's eye spacing. A bulby nose bottom.
It didn't stick out for me.
That would be a great band name.
This episode is brought to you by Unchained Pre-Adolescent Rage. It's spicy.
Well, I didn't get out of bed until like noon.
Oh.
I took a really long Herkle-Dorkle. It's not as dirty as it sounds. It's just...
You don't know what I was imagining.
It just means you're just laying in bed doing nothing.
I got my finger in my ear. I'm clearly ready. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
It's a tale as old as time.
Oh, damn it.
What?
Like the Beauty and the Beast song in my head.
Because while Charlie Smith and Tanya Bundick... I can do this. I practiced last night.
Such a child.
Her name's Bundick. Because while Charlie Smith and Tanya Bundick were building a life together...
You said Bundick. Don't be crying. We don't want Pants to be involved. My AI doesn't think that Accomack, keeps saying Accomack, it doesn't think it's a real place. It thinks that she's telling me something false. It's like, no, there is a Accomack prefecture in Japan. But
well, it's Accomack. Maybe I'll figure it out when we start talking about Chincoteague and Assateague.
No, it thinks you said chinkity chink, not fatigue.
Psychology has a word for them.
Dickheads. Crime to burn will not cause swelling or infection between the anus and genitals.
I have to sneeze.
Do it. Oh. Oh.
Every time I sneeze, it asks me why Pokemon are dying. Is it Pokemon or Pokemons? Pokemates? What's the plural of a Pokemon? This is a public service announcement. If you are a teenager considering joining your local volunteer fire department as a creative way to skip school, please be advised. This may result in a 30-year career in fire protection engineering and a true crime podcast about arson and criminal fires. Side effects may include an intimate knowledge of rural water supply logistics, strong opinions about tanker operations, and an inability to listen to anyone say, "It just caught fire," without asking several follow-up questions. You've been warned. You may, however, be provided with a cot, but it might be in the engine bay, where you will wake up lightly infused with the scent of diesel. This is normal. This is character building. This is how they get you.
No one wants a rogue sphincter.
This is a public service announcement from Crime to Burn. In certain rural communities, you will be classified into one of two categories: born here or been here. There is no third category. The rest of you are newcomers. You don't deserve a category yet. Your classification will determine how quickly people trust you and how much they tell you, and whether or not they believe you know what you're talking about. This system has no formal documentation. It is universally understood, though.
I really like a guy who will cuss at his customers. I don't know, man. Something about it warms me in a special place.
I wouldn't have been surprised if you caught a pony, to be honest with you. I've known you for a really long time. And you've never stopped making me go, how do you do that?
The seahorse daddies carry the babies. I don't have many heroes. Rick Moranis is a hero of mine. I'm going to put you in one of those Hannibal Lecter masks and strap you to a hand truck.
I've never punched anybody that didn't ask me to.
I just recycle things from movies I've seen. I don't even have any original thoughts. Electricity tastes tingly. I'm in danger. We will say words to you now with our voices.
I need a feral raccoon.
I'm feral raccoon adjacent. Because you have good face wrinkles. No, good ones. They're flattering.
All right, well, I got to go do my skincare routine now, so sign off.
Make sure to exfoliate.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
They say the past was a simpler time. Kids rode their bikes till the streetlights came on. Neighbors looked out for one another, and everybody kept their doors unlocked. But for many families, this was not the reality. I'm Megan, host of A Simpler Time True Crime, where each week I revisit older unsolved cases from decades past. Disappearances, suspicious deaths, and stories that were never fully told. Through a victim and survivor-centered lens, I challenge the idea that a simpler time meant a safer one, and give voice to those left behind. Because time doesn't erase the need for answers. And every case deserves a second look. Tune in each week and subscribe to A Simpler Time True Crime wherever you get your podcasts.